Thank you. It's good to be here this evening. Glad to see everyone. I'm Jim Castema, state senator for 12 years, a legislator for 16. I grew up in the very small farming town of Puyallup in the 1960s. From there, I graduated from the University of California at Berkeley. I took off on a bicycle and actually tried to bicycle around the world. I was in Israel during the Israel-Lebanon War. From there, I left and I went through Yugoslavia on my bicycle. I was arrested, thrown in jail in northern Yugoslavia. Folks, in my travels and experience, I see people live and I see people die to actually have representation and sovereignty in their country. In the legislature, I chaired the elections committee after the 2004 election and rewrote the election law, everything from how you count a ballot to moving the primary forward. As you know, I am fiercely independent, I'm knowledgeable, I am willing to go ahead and debate the opponents. I just, in fact, debated the Republican opponent, Tim Wyden, down in Vancouver. I think that's the kind of person you want in the Secretary of State's office, and I think I have those qualifications. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the 34th District for putting a spotlight on 3 races that frankly, in this very busy year, aren't getting a lot of spotlight. So it's great to see so many people. In 1 minute, it's pretty hard to describe who you are and what you've done, but fortunately, Sharon and I have made the 34th District our home for the last 30 years. And, I've had the honor of representing this area on the County Council for 14 years and serving this area as mayor for 8 years. I'm running for Secretary of State because I believe in this democratic institution that we have, the right to choose our own leaders, to make decisions for ourselves that so many people around the world do not have. I got involved in politics at the age of 16 in going to my precinct conference, which was then on a Tuesday night, to kind of date myself. My mother wanted to go, my dad wanted to go to bed, so she invited me to go. Got to feel as a 16-year-old that my voice counted. I think with the huge money that's coming into our politics, it's harder for that average voice to be heard. I want to be a champion for making sure that gets heard.
Thank you. I'm Kathleen Drew, and it's good to see you all again. I think this is about my 4th time here since I started this race, so I'm beginning to feel a bit of part of this community. I want to be your next Secretary of State, and I look forward to telling you why I am the best qualified and the best capable to win this election. I won in the toughest district against the toughest opponent of anybody in this room when I beat Dino Rossi in 1992 for the state I'm the only candidate running for this office that has both legislative and state executive experience. I know both how to get things done in the legislature and how to implement them. And I very much want to do things to make sure that we are registering people to vote, we are eliminating barriers to voters, and we are standing firmly in opposition to the wave of suppression happening across this country. I appreciate your support.
Let's go ahead and show the opposite direction in this next question. You have 1 minute each to respond. What specific experience do you have with election laws, voter registration, and election management? Kathleen, if you could get us started.
How much time do I have?
1 minute.
Okay, thank you. Have to get the round here. In terms of voter registration, I started actually working in politics when I was 11, so I did be like a few years there. Except probably it was the same year. It was probably 1972. 71, yeah. I also have worked I worked throughout my high school years and my college years registering voters, working for campaigns. Specifically, when I was in the state legislature, I was vice chair of Government Operations Committee. We tried to do many things, such as to stop signature gatherers, which was not something we could do constitutionally, but we did try many ballot initiatives. The past 3 years, I've worked on election laws for the governor, reviewing every piece of legislation that was passed and advising her on the characteristics of that legislation. So I have a great deal of experience, again, both on the legislative side and in the executive side in terms of implementation. Thank you.
You said the opposite direction. Does that mean we have Okay, great. As I mentioned, have been involved in elections since I was 16 years old. So I've played a lot of different roles. I had the opportunity to run one campaign and decided I'd probably be a better candidate than campaign manager. Although we did win that race. It was Norm Rice's first race for city council. I've had a chance to be involved in registering voters, and the concerns that I have are around things like the initiative process, where Costco, which is a great local company, I love Costco. It's just down the hill, they do a great job. But when a single company can put $20 million on the table, hire people to get signatures, and have a piece of legislation specifically aimed at their bottom line, that's a bad precedent, and we need to fix that. I had a chance as a King County Council member to start the very first video voters guide. We had the county television channel that belonged to all the people. We thought it'd be nice if people could see the candidates as well as read about them in the voters pamphlet. That video voters pamphlet was one of the first around, and it's still going strong.
When it comes just to election law, you have to understand that 2004 election was the closest election this state has ever seen in a governor's race. Approximately 130 votes between Dino Rossi and the governor. What had happened in elections is that there had been complacency over the years in how we ran elections. So we literally had to rewrite the laws. Here's what I find very unfortunate about Washington State. Despite what you hear about our performance in elections, over the last 30 years, we rank about 23rd in the country when it comes to actually people registering and those people voting. Here's two things that I supported this last legislative session. Number one, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds. I say pre-registration. 40% of everyone who registers do so when they get their driver's license. It's an ideal opportunity for young people to become registered. Second of all, I think more agencies need to be involved in registering. In other words, any contact you have with the state agency, that should be used as an opportunity for you to register. In that way, we can get our performance up. Thank you.
Okay, Greg, let's give you a chance to go first, and then we'll go to Senator Kastner and then Kathleen. And let's do 30 seconds for this answer, if you could.
Let's see.
It's not complicated. Initiatives, good or bad, and explain.
Well, initiatives are good, but the reason that initiatives are in our state constitution is that they were a relief valve, that the money interests would stop things from happening in the legislature, and you had a relief valve for the citizens to go and make law. The problem is that it has turned on its head with the advent of paid signature gatherers. Now, if you're willing to spend enough money, it's a formula. You can get pretty much any piece of junk on the ballot you want. And as I said before, some of that can be aimed directly at your bottom line, and that we need to fix.
Initiatives, good. Reforms needed. The reforms we need are to make sure that the pages signed for signatures are, the people who are gathering those signatures sign the pages. If they don't, they get extra scrutiny. So you can't just have Tim Eyman signing all the pages that are returned, but we get better scrutiny from the Secretary of State's office. You need to make sure that your signature gatherers are registered voters, and that the company is registered in the state of Washington, and I have several other very specific ideas I'd like to work on.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. In fact, in 1912, we put the initiative process in place for doing exactly what Greg Nichols mentioned, and that is to overcome the powerful interests in Olympia. It has been used by those very same powerful interest groups to get their way in Olympia when they can't. Here's a couple of ideas. First of all, I have actually sponsored legislation that brings more transparency to that. I have sponsored legislation that makes sure that if a person is paid to go ahead and collect those signatures, they have to identify themselves as a paid signature gatherer. I think people want to know what they're doing. Second of all, any questions I'm done? Oh, I thought that was really sincere.
Yeah, he's good. Speaking of paid signature gatherers, you should be a paid timekeeper. All right, let's start with you and then move down the table. 30 seconds for this question. It's a question from the audience, so thank you for whoever submitted it. What should be done about felons' voting rights or lack thereof? In particular, speak to the lack of clarity in the state voters pamphlet.
Well, if there's any ambiguity, it should be cleared up. A person who is released from prison can now go ahead and register to vote unless they are under supervision by the state. So that was something we actually passed a couple of years in the legislature. I still find it interesting that on some websites it doesn't state that. That information has to get out there. I want to wait for applause. I'm just kidding. So there already is. We already have dealt with that issue. I think it's kind of a misnomer that when you get out of prison, you can't go ahead and register to vote. Again, we have to convey that to the voters. Thank you.
I absolutely agree. When a person has paid their debt to society, they ought to have their civil rights restored, and first and foremost amongst those is the franchise to vote.
Thank you. It is ambiguous in the voter's guide. The Secretary of State has not come up to terms with the current law that has been changed. I will change that as Secretary of State. We need to do more than just put it on the voter's pamphlet. We need to reach out because felons, those who are former felons who have paid their debt, do not know, and they will not register. So we have to do more education, directly reach into the communities, and that's what I'm committed to doing.
Come back this way. Trying to mix it up here as best we can. Keeping you on your toes. Let's do a minute for this question. A minute each, please. What's your opinion of the legacy of Sam Reed?
Only a minute.
Only a minute.
Okay, well, to begin with, I think that the state has made great progress towards moving to vote by mail. There are challenges that still need to be worked out. I think certainly we have to make sure that there are ballot drop boxes in communities. They tend not to be in communities around the state that are low-income communities of color, places where we need to increase registration. But I do think we do have to struggle with, number one, implementing the new law, which I supported. I called the governor to ask her to support for PCO elections and make sure that the Secretary of State works with the local parties, not as a favorite, but even works with third parties to make sure that information reaches the voters. I think that we also have to do a great deal of work in even gathering the basic demographic data. The Secretary of State does not know who registers to vote and who votes, and I will start that process.
So I think that in one regard in particular, we need to give props to the incumbent who's retiring. And that is in 2004, when we had that incredibly close election. He could have turned into Catherine Harris and been a partisan and not a very professional Secretary of State. But I think he did us a good service by standing up and making sure that the votes got counted. And I take my hat off to him, even though he's a member of the other party. I think his predecessor, Ralph Monroe, did some good things as well. I think in making the office a goodwill ambassador for the state of Washington, I think he did a good thing that benefited the people of our state. And I think that there are a couple of other things that need to be done by that office and that I look forward to doing. One is to bring people together to talk about our democratic institutions, to convene people to see what reforms can be made, where we have common ground so that we can return to where they work for the average person. And then second, we need a champion for our democratic values. We need a Secretary of State who will stand up and say, this is important and why, and be the champion for it.
Sam Reed will go down in history as having tremendous integrity because after the 2004 election, he could have been very partisan about what he did. But instead, he decided to do what was the best policy. He didn't choose whichever party he was affiliated with. This is what I would do different. The clarity of the performance measures in the Secretary of State's office is not what it should be. When you walk through the Secretary of State's office, if I'm elected Secretary of State, on the wall you will see clear, balanced scorecards, performance measures for every single division in the Secretary of State's office. Folks, my goal is to make the Secretary of State's office in Washington State and prove it to you. Prove that we are the best Secretary of State's office in the United States, if not perhaps the world. And that's my goal, Secretary of State.
All right. We'll start with Greg and then go to Senator Castleman and Kathleen. This is probably a yes/no question, so we're going to give you 10 seconds.
Oh, no.
Should Washington require initiatives to identify funding sources?
Yes.
Yes, and in fact, very, very supportive. I believe I even signed on to that bipartisan bill in the legislature that would make that a constitutional amendment.
Absolutely.
All right, that was too easy. So we're going to go on to another question. This is from the audience, and there's been several questions submitted in the last couple of races. If they are more statements and questions, we'll reserve those for the May 9th endorsement meeting when you can make those statements. With this one, Kathleen, if you could start us and then we'll move down the table. 30 seconds for it, please. A search of the PDC reveals many managers in the Secretary of State's office contribute significantly and frequently to Republicans. How would you manage staff that oppose your ideology?
Well, first of all, it is illegal and inappropriate for somebody to take political persuasion into account within an office. So I think that the ethics of it would be not to address who people give to because that is their choice. I have worked with people across the board in all the different jobs that I've had. I think we work on similar goals in terms of what are the values of the office, and I will work to be a leader in that one.
I think a person's private beliefs and their participation in the political process is their own business, and not an appropriate thing for the Secretary of State to take into consideration. I had an opportunity for 8 years to run an organization that had 11,000 employees, and 6 or 7 of them disagreed with me from time to time. So there's a place in our society for diversity of opinion within offices, and that will not only be tolerated, it will be encouraged.
I agree. As long as everybody's focused on what's best for Washington State, I think that is good.
All right. So we've got a couple of actual answers that were less than time allotted, which gives us time for one more question before closing statements. Let's go with 30 seconds on this one, and then we'll go in the order of Greg, Kathleen, and then Senator Castleman. You get elected. What do you do on your own initiative in the first 100 days?
I will, in the first 100 days as Secretary of State, bring together people who are concerned about our democratic institutions, the initiative process, the fact that big money can now be dropped into elections basically anonymously at the last minute. And I will see where we can find common ground for an agenda to present to the Washington State Legislature. These democratic institutions are the core of what allow us to gather nights like tonight and make a difference in the political process, and we need to make sure that they continue to work.
In my first 100 days, I will prepare the policy and budget package that has to go to the state legislature in order to support the goals of the office. That's what happens. The legislature is convening. You have to get the support from the legislature, and those policies will include pre-registration for 16, 17-year-olds, election day registration, and the Voting Rights Act.
For the first year, it's important that the Secretary of State's office build a firm foundation. In the first very initial 30, 90 days, I will make sure that all of my different division directors have a clear vision, have a clear vision, mission, and have clear performance measures. And that those, in fact, are aligned with where we are going with the Secretary of State's office. As to the legislature, again, it's important we have a firm foundation. But dealing with the legislature, I will focus on efforts to expand voter registration and voter participation.
So we've only got time for a 30-second closing statement, and I apologize if that's short, but we'll see you think on your toes here. And Senator, if you could get us started, and we'll move straight down the table.
Thank you. I do appreciate being here this evening. As you know, I've been a very independent legislator in Olympia, and I've kind of proven that point. I think that a Secretary of State needs to be independent, if not fiercely independent. I think it's someone who needs to be knowledgeable, know election law, and in fact be a competent individual. I've chaired 2 committees in the legislature, the Elections Committee, Government Operations and Elections, and also the Economic Development Committee in the State Senate. The Secretary of State's office does more than elections, although elections are very important. Applause.
Well, thank you for having us here tonight. I'm asking for your support and your vote in an important election. The Democrat has not won this office since 1960, and that fellow was a band leader. There's a reason for that, I think, and we need, as a party, to think about how we put our strongest candidate forward so that we can get some new and fresh perspectives of what goes on in that office. I will provide that. I believe that I'm the candidate who has the best chance of being successful in the November election, and I ask for your support and your hard work to make it happen.
Thank you. I'm Kathleen Drew, and I tell you that because I'm the least known candidate who has raised the most money and is the only candidate that has a statewide campaign for this office, which is what you need to win. I have the support from over 20 legislators, dozens of community leaders, the National Organization of Women, the Women's Political Caucus, and I'm the only Democratic woman running for one of our 9 state offices. I would greatly appreciate your support.